And so we want to take this time to open the floor for a question and answer session with our audience members. So if you can raise your hand, I'll call on you. And please let us know who you're directing the question towards. It can be from Dr. Rein's presentation, or if you had any questions from the earlier panel. But yes, we'll try to answer each question as time allows. But yes, do any of our audience members or panelists have any questions they would like to ask?
Yes, I really want to thank Dr. Rein for an outstanding presentation, certainly opening up my eyes to a whole lot beyond what I normally work with, which is looking at things like the energy balance for the planet Earth, with energy coming from the sun, of course, in different wavelengths. Um, and the idea that the atmosphere is transparent for visible light to the electromagnetic energy of visible light, but in fact is somewhat opaque to the longer wavelengths of, say, infrared energy. And I'm just wondering whether these traditional ways of looking at energy transport have any kind of analog when we're talking about higher forms of energy and how that energy moves around, where that energy is spatially, because obviously by bringing physicality into the picture, which we have to do if we want to understand climate change, that makes an understanding of several different levels of energy, 34 levels of energy, very, very complex. I'm just wondering, is there any thought about the physical location and how this energy moves around?
Well, so the first part of that question was about conventional energies and how they penetrate the body or don't. And I mean, I've been part of the Bioelectromagnetic Society for many years, and they obviously have their own ideas about how electromagnetic energy propagates through the body and where it's localized and how it functions. But the the higher order energies that I'm talking about don't apparently use the same mechanism. And the reason is because in the electromagnetic domain, the properties of electromagnetic fields are described by Maxwell's equations. And the kind of energies that I'm talking about are not described by Maxwell's equations. Maybe Schrodinger's equations, or maybe even equations we don't even know about yet, because quantum energy, although quantum processes have been described in the body, this is a new discipline called quantum biology. They do acknowledge that quantum processes like photosynthesis do exist in the body, but they do not really talk about quantum energy fields. And I'd love to get some feedback from the rest of the physicists in this speaker list here. So the idea that divine energy is beyond quantum energy leaves us completely perplexed about how this kind of energy functions in the body, where it's localized, and it basically the question that's being asked. And the only thing I can say to that is that I believe that there are higher dimensional properties. Certain molecules like DNA, for example, have quantum properties. And if they have quantum properties, then they probably have higher order energies associated with them. And I'm a biologist, not a physicist. So exactly how these energies are utilized by the body as far as I know, maybe Dr. Josephson has some other ideas, is unknown at this point.
Yeah. Well, there's a field of biology known as biosemiosis, which is how information has meaning, and I think that answers your question. There's a very nice paper by someone called Barbieri, who goes into detail as to why it's something additional to conventional understanding. I'm not too sure what I can say about it. It's also connected with coordination dynamics in that there are units called synergies, which are studied by, can be studied in the brain, where information has functional properties. So in other words, we're talking about a special kind of organization which physicists don't know about, and I'm interested in studying it.
Oh, me too.
Yeah.
Thank you.
But you may have gone beyond where we've got. I don't know. I think these people, as I mentioned, really more into this than me, and they should have been giving this here talking about their insights. But anyway.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rein, Dr. Josephson. Thank you, Dr. Davidson, for your question. That was a really good question. And I see, Dr. Jordan, you have your hand up.
Yeah, thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yeah.
okay, great.
I'm out here in the wind because it's too loud in the coffee shop. Thanks, Glenn. Thank Ryan. Thanks for that important talk. The question I have is, I completely copacetic with the idea of different types, different scales of energy. I'm very in tune with the idea of investigating things, particularly as it relates to the way we might consider dealing with climate change. The question I have is, when we label one of those energies a divine, I'm wondering, and to what extent we're sort of placing a valence on levels of energy. And I'm wondering if it leads to an assumption that achieving the divine, sorry, my coffee's the wrong way, is what will help us with the climate change. And the reason is, if we're going to believe that everything's about everything, if we're going to believe that we're fractal embodiments of reality, then all of it's divine, right? All of it is naturally and necessarily about. All of it is all of it is naturally and necessarily meaningful. I would argue there is nothing that is meaningless. So sometimes I wonder where we're going to put our efforts when it comes to understanding what we are and what we're in, when it comes to dealing with climate change and using notions of the divine as something that might, I don't know. I'll stop there.
Okay, so I totally agree with what you just said, and that's consistent with the Hindu philosophy that, I use the term divine, but we could also use the term consciousness. We could use lots of different terms, but it's the most subtle, if you will. Go back to David Bohm. It's the most subtle of all forms of energy, at the center of the implicate order. And in fact, it was David Bohm who talked about layers within the implicate order. I'm just giving those layers a little more detailed description. But the fact that divine energy is present in all matter and in all other forms of energy is certainly been stated in the Hindu philosophy. But to what extent that's acknowledged by physicists, I'm not sure, but I totally agree with you that the divine energy is always present in all forms of energy and all forms of matter. But the practicality of that is that, that energy is there, but how do we utilize it? How do we access it? And how can we resonate with it to help raise our consciousness? That was the theme of my talk.
Thank you, Dr. Rein. And I see Dr. Keepin would like to add on. Or...
Yes, I just wanted to thank you, Dr. Rein, for that very illuminating presentation, and I really greatly appreciate the effort to articulate more detail about these various levels of consciousness and levels of energy. I have two questions. One is just about what you refer to as 5D and 4D. I assume the D refers to dimensions,
Yes.
but I'm
Yes.
sure. Okay. So then we're moving into higher dimensional realities in some
Right.
sense, that go beyond. Those aren't geometric Euclidean type dimensions, are they? Or are they perhaps? So that's just a little more about the ontology of those dimensions, if you have it. And then secondly, I'm assuming that a lot of what you're mapping out is already there in like the Kashmir Shaivism system. Is that correct? Essentially, and I think there's probably equivalent systems. I know, for example, the central channel is there in the Taoist system. It's there in the Tibetan Buddhist system. Tibetan Buddhist system has 5 chakras rather than 7 typically. These are mapped out in different ways, but they all have certain things in common. And one of them is that there is a central channel and that there is these energy currents that take place in the central channel, and that is foundational to realizing these higher states of awareness. And also that as that central channel is activated, it also eventually grows kind of perpendicular to the length and expands. And that's how the consciousness expands to include the various levels of the cosmic reality. I think it was Ajit Mukherjee, the Tibetan Buddhist who's scholar practitioner, who said, if you come to know the deep secrets or deepest secrets of the body, you come to know the deepest secrets of the universe. And he's really speaking to exactly what you're saying. The body is literally a fractal instantiation
Right.
of the kind of energy and consciousness structure of the entire cosmos,
Right.
which is really incredibly important. And that alone, I would say, is the answer to the question, why do we need to bring science and spirituality together? Because we need to do that to flesh out the fullness of the nature of reality itself and the nature of the human being ourselves. But back, so my second question is, are the practices to realize these various levels of energy? And because you're speaking about kind of the subtle, intricate scientific process of the conversion down to different levels, it's beautiful. But the practices to achieve those, are those practices essentially the Kashmir Shaiva, for example, the practices of that tradition, or maybe of the Tibetan Buddhist or Taoist tradition that have developed practices in which there are the realizations of these levels of energy within the practitioner?
Okay, got it. Thank you for the question. So my understanding is that, well, back to your original question, is that, yeah, these energy levels are described, but they're not just in Shaivism, but they're not described in scientific terminology, and they're not really described in a way that people can really relate to be honest, because they're pretty exotic, esoteric descriptions, because that's the nature of the energy. But from a practical point of view, because I actually have been meditating and studying meditation for many years, what the traditional schools are lacking is the use of imagery, because they basically are saying, well, you just focus on put your consciousness in your pineal gland or your crown chakra or whatever, and then everything else just happens automatically. But I believe that specific imagery can be used to facilitate the process. And the imagery that I didn't really have time to go into, is like I said, visualize these mechanisms, visualize your DNA wrapping itself into a toroid, and that will facilitate the process. And then, so that's the second question. The first question is, are they Euclidean? The higher dimensions are not Euclidean, and do not obey the laws of Maxwell and Hertz in the electromagnetic world. So now there are descriptions that really go over my head about mathematical descriptions of 5D, five-dimensional reality. Kaluza, Klein, for example, talk about the nature of the energies, and it's a whole different mathematics, and it's a whole different way of looking at energy. And it's something I should go back and get a PhD in mathematical physics, and I might be able to understand this stuff. But for now, the short answer is that it's different kind of energy. It's non-Euclidean, if you want to put it in those terminology. Great questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And in the chat, we have the paper by Barbieri that Dr. Josephson was mentioning earlier, if you would like to save that.
Oh,
and
cool.
then in the chat, we have a question from Dr. Wilson. Dr. Wilson, would you like to unmute and share it, or would you prefer I can read it out from the chat too, if you'd like?
Okay, so I'm familiar with some schools of psychotherapy, like internal family systems, where the client focuses on a particular part of the body. And then through doing that, the client can access an emotion, an image, or an idea from that part of the body as a way of gaining insight into a mental or psychic state. Can you comment on what kind of physical energy mechanism can be involved here?
Sorry, could you elaborate? Involved here? Where?
Involved in the ability of a tissue of the body, like say a leg or a stomach or a throat, to be a place that gives insight into mental energy of thought, feeling, emotion, or image.
Whoa, that's quite a question. Well, you know, a traditional neuroscientist would say it's the electrical energy associated with a thought that can do that, but they wouldn't associate that with an organ specifically. So to go from an organ, so the answer to that question is that, yeah, so clearly organs have electromagnetic fields associated with them. And the question then arises, are the higher dimensional energies that I referred to in my talk, are they present in the physical body, or are they only present in the higher dimensional bodies, like the light body or consciousness or the mind, you know? And that's a very interesting question, actually. And there's some evidence, at least, that okay, the best example is the quantum processes that are now being observed in the body at the cellular level in the tissue. And if those quantum processes generate quantum fields, then we have quantum fields carrying the information, biochemical information, cellular information, carrying that information, and then the question is, well, where does it go? And it's either going to go up into the mind, where the mind can then utilize that information and create whatever it needs to create in the physical body, or it can go down into the molecular level and influence certain molecules like DNA and other molecules that have quantum properties. Microtubules, another example. So
or it could go up to the thought body. You were mentioning other bodies. So that's interesting to me, because if there's a connection between these other bodies, as in theosophical systems, with the physical body, maybe connecting through energies like the acupuncture energy or things like that, then you can see a circuit.
Yeah, That's a good point. If it enters into the acupuncture meridian system, then it can travel all over the entire body and cause, obviously, acupuncture does cause physical effects in the body. So that energy, whether it's electromagnetic or beyond electromagnetic, can clearly propagate throughout the whole body through the acupuncture meridian system. So you answered your own question. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Rein.
Thank you so much, Dr. Wilson, for that question. Thank you. And I see we have one question in the chat from Professor Innocent Egbunike on what will you say are the shared beliefs between science and the Bible?
Well, well, as I said in my introduction, the Bible would use the word God inside the body we're talking about, and scientists would use the word soul, except most scientists don't use that word. So maybe the word consciousness would be a word that would be used by a scientific community. But that's similar, if not identical, to what the Bible is talking about as a form of energy which controls everything in the body, our thoughts, our emotions, and our physicality. That's the short answer to that question.
Thank you, Dr. Rein. And would anyone else have any questions they would like to ask, or if any of our panelists too would like to add on?
Well, there's just one thing I said that's completely different, which is that Luc Montagnier was doing these experiments on DNA, where he found a particular sound signals could do something to the DNA. I think he was rather hounded out of science for suggesting that. As was Ben Van Ist earlier.
Yeah. In fact, what's intriguing by Dr. Montagnier's work is that he was able to measure the energy, electromagnetic energy emitted by the DNA molecule. And when I confronted him about that, he said, well, yeah. I said, I want to continue that line of research. You want to collaborate? And he said, yeah, well, the problem with that is that it's not reproducible, which means to me that he observed the phenomena, but because it's kind of an etheric phenomena, it doesn't happen all the time. And you have to be in the right environment to be able to measure it. And so he thought it was just too complicated, and that our methods for measuring electromagnetic fields emitted from cells and molecules was just not sensitive enough to be able to, I mean, it's the same thing with biophotons. I mean, Pop was measuring biophotons from cells, but they're very, very weak. And, we barely can measure them. So as scientific validation for the idea, for example, that two cell types can talk to each other, or different brain regions can talk to each other via electromagnetic energy, in addition to chemicals.
Thank you. Yeah, there's so much to learn and so much we're gaining from all the questions and the insights. Would anyone else like to add on, or any other questions too? I want to make sure, open the floor if anyone. We do have some comments in the chat, so please check it out if you would like. I know we have an earlier comment and one now from Dr. Wilson. All right, I think if that's everyone and there are no further questions, we can go on to our next portion of the program. Thank you so much to everyone who asked a question, and to our panelists and Dr. Rein. Thank you so much for answering each of them so thoughtfully.
My pleasure.
Thank you.